It was a plane that the United States Army Air Forces didn't even ask for, yet the Douglas XP-42 Mixmaster was designed as a vision of the future, and it was such a bold departure from conventional bombers that it was impossible to ignore. As an embodiment of the Douglas Aircraft Company's aggressive and forward-thinking approach, the XB-42 boasted a radical streamlined design with a unique pusher configuration and inline engines. It was a strange aircraft, with an appearance far different from its contemporaries. But these features were not merely aesthetic. Not only did the XB-42 promise unmatched velocity with top speeds over 100 miles per hour faster than other bombers of the era, but it also offered the possibility of operating at much longer ranges, revolutionizing aerial bombardment strategy by allowing it to penetrate far behind enemy defenses. While the aircraft's potential was curtailed by the rapid onset of jet technology and the end of the war that it was designed to fight in, its legacy endures as a fascinating chapter in the annals of aviation history. During World War II, America's daylight precision bombing missions, designed to hit specific military and industrial targets and weaken the Axis forces, heavily depended on the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and the consolidated B-24 Liberator. The B-17 could carry up to 4,800 pounds of bombs. The B-24, with its more efficient wing design and higher-powered engines, could carry up to 8,000 pounds. Both could inflict substantial damage on their targets. Both aircraft were equipped with multiple defensive gun positions, providing them with stiff protection against enemy fighters. Nevertheless, as the war raged on, the need emerged for a bomber with a longer range that would allow the United States Army Air Force to extend the reach of bombing missions, perhaps even eliminating the use of forward bases, which were often difficult to secure and maintain. With this in mind, Boeing followed the B-17 with the B-29 Superfortress, which had an impressive maximum range of 3,250 miles compared to its predecessor's 2,000 miles. However, this B-29 was not only enormous, with a length of 99 feet and a wingspan of 141 feet, but the project also cost a staggering $3 billion, making it the most expensive of the entire war and severely limiting the aircraft's viability. At the same time, it had become evident that many bombers were extremely vulnerable to interception by faster, more agile enemy fighter planes. The top speeds of the B-17 and the B-24 were 287 and 290 miles per hour, respectively. The German Messerschmitt Bf-109 topped out at 390 miles per hour. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 reached 408 miles per hour, an obvious problem. This vulnerability not only threatened the success of bombing missions, but also led to significant losses of aircraft and crew. If the Allies could develop faster bombers, it would reduce the time window during which enemy fighters could intercept and attack them. Higher speeds were believed to allow bombers to operate without the need for fighter escorts, which was particularly important during the early years of the war when most fighters had limited range and therefore would not be able to accompany bombers on missions deep in enemy territory. In 1943, Douglas Aircraft Company, which along with Vega, had been part of the consortium that had assisted Boeing with the production of the B-17, recognized this demand for a bomber that had the longer range of the B-29, yet would be smaller and more cost-effective. What's more, by exploring ways to minimize aerodynamic drag and enhance propulsion efficiency, they believed it would be possible to create a medium bomber that could achieve a top speed of 400 miles per hour. This would be significantly faster than the Allies' current options in this category and have a much better chance of evading enemy fighters. Taking the initiative, Douglas began developing an aircraft that they believed would fulfill these criteria despite the lack of a formal solicitation from the military. Instead of tweaking an existing design, Chief of Engineering Edward F. Burton and his team planned a brand new aircraft from scratch, creating a bomber that would represent a significant break from all that had come before it. The design they finally settled on, initially known as Model 459, but soon given the name XP42, had a 70-foot 6-inch wingspan, was 53 feet 8 inches long, and had a number of unconventional features that aimed to optimize aerodynamic efficiency and performance. The most distinctive aspect of the aircraft was its propulsion system. Instead of a traditional wing mount, it utilized a pair of Allison V1710 engines stuffed into the fuselage. The 12-cylinder liquid-cooled inline engines were already well known for their use in aircraft, such as the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Each engine was cooled by intakes on the leading edge of the wings, with the radiators located in the fuselage, and came equipped with a variable-speed supercharger. They were connected to counter-rotating coaxial 3-blade Curtiss electric propellers located at the tail via long shafts, similar to the 2-section shafts found in the Bell P-39 Airacobra, which led to a reduction in the gearbox. Douglas aimed for the propellers to have independent and automatic control, along with a reversible pitch to reduce landing distances and control dive speeds. These propellers gave the XP42 its unofficial but widely used nickname Mixmaster after the popular kitchen mixer, which some said the propellers resembled. To avoid risks to crew members needing to bail out, particularly the danger of being thrown into the rear propellers, the design included an explosive mechanism to detach the props from the tail cone during emergencies, enhancing safety during egress. The XP42's unconventional pusher configuration, combined with the clean, unobstructed wing design, contributed to lowering the aerodynamic drag to just 70% of that of a conventional twin-engine bomber with tractor propellers. It also placed the aircraft's expected top speed at sea level at 344 miles per hour, with a projected maximum speed of 410 miles per hour at 23,800 feet. Its operational range at 10,000 feet was about 1,840 miles, which could be extended to 5,400 miles by reducing the bomb load and carrying additional fuel, making it well suited to missions that went far beyond enemy lines. In addition, the Mixmaster featured a tricycle landing gear arrangement, which was becoming more common in military aircraft designs of the time due to the improved forward visibility and handling characteristics it offered on the ground. The aircraft's all-metal construction and laminar flow airfoil wings were also indicative of the advanced design principles applied to new aircraft development during the period. Its full four-surface cruciform tail featured a lower fin and rudder assembly to ensure the aircraft's coaxial propellers did not come into contact with the ground. Contrasting with most USAAF bombers of the time, which often had crews of up to 10, the XP-42 was to be manned by just 3 individuals: a pilot, a co-pilot gunner, and a bombardier. They were positioned in unpressurized compartments, with the pilot and co-pilot gunner sitting side by side under distinctive bubble canopies offering excellent visibility, while the bombardier was stationed in a glazed section at the very front of the aircraft, behind a transparent nose made of plexiglass. The co-pilot's seat could rotate 180 degrees to allow the operation of the gun control system. Internally, the XP-42 was designed to carry bombs with a combined weight of up to 8,000 pounds, a powerful payload comparable to that of many much larger and more conventional bombers of the day. Meanwhile, defensive armament was minimal, avoiding the heavy armed turrets often found on contemporary bombers. There were a pair of Fosst-Point 50-inch or 12.7mm machine guns on each side, integrated into the wing's trailing edge, with the option to retract into the wings when not needed. Their aim was controlled by the co-pilot using a special sighting station at the back of his cockpit. These guns' range of motion was restricted to 25 degrees to either side and could be elevated between 20 and 15 degrees, providing a limited coverage area to the rear only. Given the aircraft's impressive speed, it was anticipated that enemy fighters would be less likely to engage from other positions. Still, The XP-42 was also designed with provisions for 2 additional forward-facing guns. With the design complete by May 1943, Douglas unveiled their innovative aircraft concept to the USAF, who responded with great enthusiasm. This led to their decision on June 25, 1943, to commission 2 prototype models along with a static test airframe. With the first prototype ready less than a year later, the XP-42 took off for the first time on May 6, 1944, at Palm Springs Army Airfield in California, piloted by Bob Brush, with Lieutenant Colonel Henry E. Warden serving as the co-pilot. Throughout 32 test flights, the aircraft was carefully studied to make improvements. The second prototype, which made its maiden flight on August 1, 1944, from Santa Monica Airfield, also in California, featured several differences. The experimental individual bubble canopies were switched for a more traditional single canopy design with the goal of improving communication between the crew members, and the nose was covered in plywood after the plexiglass was shown to have a tendency to crack. In a bid to lighten the aircraft and increase its speed, it was fitted with hollow propeller blades, but these turned out to exacerbate existing problems with vibration, especially when the bomb bay doors were open or the gear and flaps were deployed. The tail was also enlarged in an attempt to counteract the original prototype's tendency to Dutch roll, a combination of uncommanded yaw and roll, and the inlets in the wing's leading edges were also made bigger to improve airflow, helping to maintain the engines cool. However, just 2 weeks after the second prototype first took to the skies, the Japanese officially surrendered, bringing World War II to an end. With the urgency for its completion now significantly reduced, the XP-42 project was sidelined. The USAF began turning its attention to the development of bombers with the latest cutting-edge jet technology instead, such as the North American B-45 Tornado. Nevertheless, Douglas's test pilots accumulated 70 hours in the air with the second Mixmaster prototype before officially handing it over to the USF in October 1945, where Lieutenant Colonel Fred J. Ascani and Captain Glenn W. Edwards took the helm, adding another 48 hours of flight time. Most of their flights took place at Muroc Army Airfield in California, which would later be renamed in honor of Edwards following his tragic demise in the Northrop YB-49 crash. While the aircraft didn't hit its expected performance marks, falling short of reaching its designed maximum speed and range, it did satisfy the expected rate of climb at sea level, managed the service ceiling on 2 engines, and adhered to the takeoff and landing distance requirements when clearing a 50-foot obstacle. It also showed promise in its overall stability, maneuverability, and stall characteristics, and Ascani observed that it was notably quieter than many other aircraft due to the placement of the propellers at the back of the plane. On December 8, 1945, Edwards and Warden achieved a new milestone in the second XP-42 prototype by completing a record-setting coast-to-coast flight across the United States, taking off from Long Beach, California, and landing at Bowling Field in Washington, D.C., around 2,300 miles in just over 5 hours and 15 minutes. The USF proudly announced that the aircraft maintained an impressive average speed of 433 miles per hour during this journey. However, it was not disclosed that this speed was significantly aided by strong tailwinds encountered along the route, and the aircraft's true airspeed was closer to 375 miles per hour, though this was still considered fast for a bomber. Sadly, just 8 days later, tragedy struck. On December 16th, it was Ascani's turn to fly the aircraft, this time accompanied by Major Hayduck and Lieutenant Colonel Haney. The flight took a turn for the worse right from the start, as Ascani was forced to use the emergency system to retract the landing gear after takeoff from Bowling. About 40 minutes into the flight, the cockpit began to fill with smoke, and the instrument readings indicated that the engines were overheating. Then, in a worrying sequence, both engines failed one after the other. Ascani instructed the other two men to evacuate the aircraft using their parachutes, which they did safely. Hayduck at 1,200 feet and Haney at 800 feet. Just as Ascani was preparing to bail out himself, he realized he hadn't ejected the propellers, a necessary step to prevent his companions from potentially colliding with them. Quickly, he activated the mechanism to detach the props and the heavy gearbox, which dramatically altered the aircraft's balance and sent it into a sharp nosedive. Ascani managed to exit the plane at 400 feet, barely high enough for his parachute to open properly. He landed in Oxon Hill, Maryland, close to where the XP-42 eventually crashed. Incredibly, all three men survived, but the Mixmaster was completely destroyed. The subsequent investigation pinpointed a malfunction in the hydraulic system as the culprit for the landing gear issue. The exact cause of the engine failures remained a mystery, though fuel shortage was suspected for the right engine's malfunction. The investigation cleared Ascani of any responsibility for the incident. Meanwhile, the first and now only surviving XB-42 prototype underwent a transformation with the installation of two Westinghouse J-30 jet engines mounted in pods beneath its wings, evolving into the XB-42A. This modification boosted its speed, allowing it to reach a top speed of 480 miles per hour. However, this still didn't match the speeds of emerging all-jet designs, including the XB-43 Jetmaster designed by Douglas themselves. Consequently, the XB-42 project was canceled. By 1949, the last remaining unit was eventually retired by the U.S. Air Force and handed over to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. In 2010, the aircraft's fuselage found a new home at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, where it awaits restoration and the opportunity to be displayed in the museum's experimental aircraft hangar as a bold testament to innovative World War II aviation technology that was not afraid to take risks. Grumman's lineage of feline-named naval fighters became synonymous with American aerial prowess during the Pacific theater of World War II. These rugged and heavily armed and armored aircraft could take a beating and fight the enemy head-on with devastating effects. As the war neared its end, Grumman introduced the most potent prop-driven fighter, the F8F Bearcat, described by many as an engine with a saddle on it due to its vast powerhouse. Despite its smaller size, the Bearcat was a force to be reckoned with, outperforming its iconic predecessors. In fact, it was nearly 2,000 pounds lighter than the formidable F6F Hellcat, yet it packed a punch in terms of performance. The Bearcat's more petite frame outperformed all its peers regarding overall speed, climbing time, takeoff, and most importantly, combat maneuverability. With its ability to take off in less than 1,000 feet, climb to 10,000 feet in under 90 seconds, and execute tight maneuvers, the Bearcat redefined aerial combat. Its unmatched agility and firepower made it a lethal presence in the sky, representing the peak of propeller-driven fighter design just as jets began to take over the skies. Grumman initially provided the U.S. Navy with powerful biplane fighters, the F2F and F3F, which lacked the more familiar feline-inspired monikers that later became synonymous with Grumman's naval aircraft. Between the development of the iconic F4F Wildcat and F6F Hellcat, Grumman engineered the twin-engine F5F, which was dubbed the Skyrocket. Despite demonstrating favorable flight characteristics, the Navy hesitated on mass production due to concerns about the aircraft's weight. There was some speculation on whether a feline name might have influenced its success. Nevertheless, the exceptional quality of Grumman's aircraft manufactured on Long Island was highly regarded. In 1942, Vice Admiral John S. McCain Sr. famously equated the Grumman brand to sterling silver in its value to the Navy, though many preferred to liken the durability of Grumman's aircraft to that of iron, coining the nickname Grumman Iron Works to reflect their toughness and reliability. This nickname underscored the enduring partnership between Grumman and the U.S. Navy, especially during the critical years of World War II, highlighting a legacy of robust and reliable military aircraft. Grumman aircraft became synonymous with American aerial prowess during the conflict, particularly in the Pacific theater. Iconic fighters such as the F4F Wildcat and the F6F Hellcat were crucial to the Navy's success against the mighty Japanese forces. The Wildcat, known for its durability, was the first to hold the line against the Japanese in 1942, while the Hellcat, introduced later, became renowned for its engine power, range, and payload capacity. The Hellcat notably accounted for over half of the Navy's aerial victories during the war. These aircraft, built to survive harsh conditions and repair quickly, solidified Grumman's reputation as the Grumman Iron Works for their rugged construction and reliability in combat. All these fighters played central roles in securing air superiority and significantly contributed to the eventual Allied victory in the Pacific. Despite the combat-tested performance of all Grumman fighters in active service, the Navy's thirst for an even more powerful aircraft was unquenchable. The Navy requested a fighter that could operate from American carriers of all sizes to maximize combat effectiveness and air supremacy against the Imperial Japanese Navy. In addition, in the aftermath of the Battle of Midway, Wildcat pilots and Grumman technicians gathered, concluding the Navy required a fighter with an excellent climb rate to respond fast to enemy attacks at sea. The power-to-weight ratio was part of the equation to achieve this optimal climb performance, which could only be maximized by consolidating the most powerful engine available with the lightest and smallest design. In 1943, the design ideas for this new fighter came to fruition as Grumman introduced the F6F Hellcat, and the American forces captured Guadalcanal from the Japanese. The fighter was given the internal designation G-58 Bearcat, and it would be powered by the most powerful engine available at the time, the two 000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R2800 engine. Besides its climb rate, the design had the potential to be faster and more maneuverable than any other Grumman fighter introduced before. To fulfill these objectives, radical changes were made. The cantilever, low-wing monoplane design made of an all-metal construction was lighter and smaller than its predecessor, the Hellcat. It was over 5 feet shorter and cut vertically to fit a bubble canopy with a raised rear fuselage, a true innovation for Navy fighters. Another feature that would make the Bearcat stand out from other Navy fighters was its Aero Products 4-blade propeller, which was over 12 feet in diameter with a nose-up profile while on the ground. Furthermore, the Bearcat's wingspan was 7 feet smaller than the Hellcat's. Despite being smaller and lighter, the design featured armor protection for the pilot, engine, and oil cooler. The Bearcat's undercarriage was wholly retractable and featured a conventional design like the empennage, which comprised a single vertical tail fin and horizontal planes. Overall, the smaller and lighter Bearcat's design had a length of 28 feet, a width of 35.8 feet, a height of 13.8 feet, and an empty weight of around 7,070 pounds. Compromises had to be made to produce this reduced weight and achieve the desired power-to-weight ratio. For instance, as part of the weight-saving measures, internal fuel capacity was reduced to 160 gallons out of the standard 183 carried by other Navy fighters. Armament was also compromised along the way to save weight. Instead of the usual 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, the Bearcat was fitted with only 4. Nonetheless, the decision was made with premeditation and war logic behind it, considering that 4 machine guns would not hinder the combat performance of the Bearcat, given the lack of armor and protection among most of the Japanese aircraft arsenal. Nonetheless, to compensate for the lack of additional machine guns, the Bearcat's wing could charge into battle carrying 4 rockets, or up to 1,000 pounds of bombs. As the war stretched on and Japan commenced resorting to the kamikaze or divine wind attacks, in which Japanese aircraft deliberately crashed into American battleships or carriers to cause maximum damage, the Navy issued more requirements for this new Grumman fighter. It had to take off fast from carriers to avoid kamikaze attacks and respond swiftly to enemy air incursions before they could approach American naval battle formations. By the summer of 1944, the prototype XF8F1 was ready and took to the skies on August 21st. It quickly demonstrated its superior speed and climbing capabilities over its predecessors. The Bearcat was indeed the ultimate propeller-driven fighter, with Robert S. Beaver Blake stating, quote, I felt like a kid who'd been riding a speedy bike and was suddenly given a Harley Davidson. Initial test flights revealed several issues, including trim problems, concerns over the cramped cockpit space, and the need for landing gear enhancements. Nonetheless, the compliments would not stop throughout the Bearcat service, with rising legend Neil Armstrong stating the Bearcat, quote, "is my personal favorite aircraft, handling, power-to-weight ratio, and all of it in a package that's pleasing to the eye. It looks like a muscle machine, and it is." Satisfied with the revised design, the Navy significantly expanded its order on October 6, 1944, requesting 2,023 F8F1 Bearcats from Grumman. This order was further augmented on February 5, 1945, when General Motors received a contract to produce an additional 1,876 units, underscoring the aircraft's strategic importance to the Navy's aerial capabilities. Despite the minor complaints, the basic variant of the Bearcat was a resounding success. That did not prevent Grumman from developing a second variant, of which only 290 airframes were produced, the F8F2 Bearcat. It was a powerhouse, an engine with a saddle, and an upgraded Pratt & Whitney R2000 830W radial piston engine. Carrying four 20mm cannons and redesigned engine cowling, the Bearcat 2 could reach a maximum speed of 455 miles per hour, an impressive rate of climb of 4,470 feet per minute, and a service ceiling of 40,000 feet. British Royal Navy legend and acclaimed test pilot Eric Winkle Brown, who would fly over 480 aircraft, would list the Bearcat as one of his top 20 fighters, saying fondly, quote, "It was a joy to throw around in the air as it had beautiful harmony of control aided by its spring tab ailerons. It had another hallmark of a good day fighter, in that it had poor stability rather in the manner of the Spitfire." This combination made for superb maneuverability, which, coupled with the fact that the aircraft was overpowered, resulted in an outstanding aerobatic performer. I do not think I have blacked myself out so consistently in an aircraft, and it was just as well for peace of mind that the Bearcat was so highly stressed. Despite its superior performance compared to all its iconic predecessors, the Bearcat was almost 2,000 pounds lighter than the mighty F6F Hellcat. The Bearcat's more petite frame outperformed all its peers regarding overall speed, climbing time, takeoff, and most importantly, combat maneuverability. The U.S. Navy declared it the most potent single-engine, propeller-driven aircraft ever constructed, pound for pound. This recognition, in line with Grumman's reputation, was a testament to the aircraft's durability and ruggedness in combat. The Bearcat, being 20% lighter, had a climb rate 30% better and was 50 miles per hour faster than the Grumman Hellcat. However, this impressive performance came too late for the war. Fighter Squadron 19 was activated in late May 1945, but only days later the U.S. opted to use atomic bombs to bring World War II to an end, preventing the Bearcat from proving its capabilities in combat. As a result, the contract was reduced to producing just 770 aircraft, with the Bearcat steadily replacing the American Hellcats within the U.S. Navy. In 1948, the powerful F8F2 Bearcat was introduced, while over 120 F8F1Bs were fitted with four 20mm cannons instead of their standard Browning machine guns. Production of the Bearcat continued into 1949, when it was removed from service after the introduction of the Grumman Panther and the F2H Banshee. Still, that was not the end of the Bearcat's career. In 1951, the French Armed Forces received approximately 200 F8F Bearcats to support their operations during the First Indochina War. After the French withdrew in 1954, the remaining Bearcats were transferred to the South Vietnamese Air Force, which continued to use them until 1959. At that point, the South Vietnamese phased out the Bearcats in favor of more modern aircraft. Meanwhile, additional Bearcats were sold to Thailand, remaining in service until 1960. Over the decades, demilitarized Bearcats gained popularity in the air racing community. Originally raced in their stock form, many Bearcats have since been extensively modified, achieving numerous speed and performance records for piston-engine aircraft. This air racing acclaim for the Bearcat could be summarized by retired Marine Colonel John J. Guse, who said, quote, "That thing went up like a skyrocket. You needed to pay attention or it could leap away from you, but if you stayed in charge, it handled well and performed beautifully." two civilian aircraft rose to fame. Rare Bear, owned by Lyle Shelton, and Conquest I, heavily modified by Daryl Greenamere. Both aircraft and their pilots racked up several air victories, with Conquest I exhibited today at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. In the end, despite not seeing combat with the American military and its use in its intended role, Grumman's Bearcat left a lasting impression in aviation history, representing the pinnacle of piston-engine fighter design before the jet age redefined air warfare. Looking like something from science fiction with its unusual double fuselage design, the North American F82 twin Mustang was undoubtedly one of the most unconventional warbirds ever to take to the skies. Born in the crucible of World War II and coming of age in the dawn of the Cold War, the F-82 was the last piston-powered fighter commissioned by the United States Air Force. The aircraft's distinctive side-by-side cockpits provided unmatched versatility, enabling pilots to share control responsibilities during extended missions. This innovative layout, along with the F-82's lengthened fuselage and strengthened wings, endowed it with exceptional range and flexibility. From long-range escort missions to night fighting, from interception to ground attack, the F-82 proved its mettle time and again, taking on roles that pushed the boundaries of what a piston-engine fighter could achieve. It embarked on marathon flights, shattering records and expectations alike, showcasing the ingenuity and innovation behind its groundbreaking design, even as the jet age nipped at its heels. The F-82 twin Mustang was born out of a critical need during World War II for a very long-range escort fighter. As the U.S. Army Air Forces planned for extensive bombing campaigns against Japan, they required an aircraft capable of accompanying B-29 Superfortress bombers on missions spanning the vast distances of the Pacific Theater. North American aviation's iconic P-51 Mustang, while an effective fighter, lacked the range for these extreme long-distance flights. Therefore, in late 1943, the USAAF approached North American to see if they could develop a successor to the Mustang, which would be capable of a range of over 2,000 miles without having to stop to refuel. Led by design chief Edgar Schmud, North American began design work in January 1944 on an unusual eye-catching prototype designated XP52, that combined two P-51 Mustang fuselages, each one containing a V1650 Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine used by most versions of the P-51. By having two fuselages and two engines, the fighter's fuel capacity would be almost doubled, making it much easier for the aircraft to stay in the air long enough to fly the long distances it needed to cover. The twin fuselage model also offered increased aerodynamic efficiency, as the two fuselages placed side by side created less additional drag than a single larger fuselage would have. What's more, each fuselage would have its own cockpit, addressing the challenge of maintaining pilot alertness over extended time periods by allowing for two pilots to alternate control during missions lasting up to 12 hours. This was not the first time that such a design had been attempted. The idea of a twin fuselage aircraft stretched back to the early days of military aviation, such as the Fokker M9 used by the Germans in World War I. In more recent years, Germany had continued experimenting with the concept in their Zwilling, or twin aircraft, such as the Heinkel He 111Z and the Messerschmitt Bf 109Z. But the former saw limited production and combat use, while the latter never made it past the prototype stage. While the United States had explored unconventional fuselage designs with the Vought V173 Flying Pancake, first flown in November 1942, North American's new aircraft would be the country's first true twin fuselage fighter. The XP-82's twin fuselages were extended with a 57-inch fuselage plug behind the cockpit, which contributed to the aircraft's total length of approximately 38 feet, 1 inch, and crucially allowed for the storage of additional fuel tanks and equipment, thereby significantly boosting the aircraft's endurance and operational flexibility across longer missions. Meanwhile, its central wing section underwent a meticulous redesign to accommodate a battery of 6 12.7mm M3 Browning automatic weapons. This setup essentially mirrored the armament of its single fuselage predecessor, but offered a denser, more focused barrage of firepower, effectively doubling the threat level against adversaries. Initially, the XP82 prototype was even more heavily armed, featuring a detachable armament pack along its centerline that housed an extra 8 12.7mm M2 Brownings, showcasing an experimental push towards maximizing onboard weaponry. However, this heavily armed configuration was ultimately not adopted for mass production. Moreover, there was speculative consideration for an even more ambitious armament, a 40mm cannon mounted in the centerline weaponry module. Yet this bold idea remained on the drawing board, a testament to the ambitious design goals that aim to push the boundaries of aerial combat capabilities. The prototype's outer wings were robustly reinforced, a modification that introduced hardpoints capable of supporting either extra fuel tanks or up to 1,000 pounds of ordnance. This adaptability allowed the aircraft to undertake longer missions or carry heavier payloads, significantly enhancing its versatility as both an escort and a ground attack aircraft. The total wingspan was around 51 feet 3 inches, a significant width contributing to the fighter's lift and stability. The XP82 inherited its dual vertical tails from the XP51F model, but the addition of large dorsal fillets provided essential stability, which was especially vital in the event of an engine failure. This feature ensured the aircraft remained manageable and less prone to spin, a significant safety enhancement during combat or mechanical troubles. The aircraft featured conventional landing gear with wheels that tucked neatly into bays located under each fuselage's center section. This arrangement was popular as it streamlined the aircraft's profile, reducing drag for better speed and fuel efficiency, and protected the gear from potential damage during high-speed, high-altitude flights. The XP82's twin Merlin engines were configured in a rather innovative fashion. The left engine, a V1650-23, was equipped with an additional gear in the propeller reduction box, enabling it to rotate in the opposite direction to the right propeller, which was driven by the standard V1650-25. The design intention was for both propellers to turn upwards as they neared the central wing, which theoretically would enhance control when operating the aircraft on a single engine. However, the theory did not translate into practice. On its initial flight attempt, the XP82 failed to achieve liftoff. A rigorous investigation by North American engineers revealed a critical flaw. The upward meeting of the propellers created excessive drag, effectively neutralizing all lift produced by the center wing section, which constituted 1/4 of the aircraft's total wing area. There was considerable pressure to fix the issue, as the USAF had been sufficiently impressed with the aircraft's potential. They had already ordered the first production models, designated P-82B, in March 1945, but now it seemed unable to take flight. Fortunately, the engineers resolved the lift problem by reversing the engines and propellers' orientation so their rotations met on the downward turn. Following these modifications, the first XP82 prototype was completed on May 25, 1945, and achieved its first successful flight a month later on June 26. However, there would soon be another change to the design. The British-designed Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, manufactured under license in the United States by Packard, had been used in the initial prototypes of the XP82 and the first 20 P-82B units. But now, as the Merlin's licensing costs increased and availability proved to be an issue, the USAAF expressed a desire for the twin Mustang to be equipped with an American engine. In August 1945, negotiations with General Motors' Allison division led to the adoption of a modified Allison V1700-100 engine for future combat models, starting with the P-82C, while the earlier Merlin-powered P-82B models were reassigned as training aircraft. Unfortunately, the Allison engines were less powerful than the Merlins, resulting in the later twin Mustangs having lower top speeds and diminished performance at high altitudes compared to their predecessors. This marked the P-82 as one of the rare instances in U.S. military aviation where a trainer variant outperformed its fighter counterpart in speed. By the time the Army Air Forces accepted the aircraft on August 30th, Japan had surrendered and World War II was over. This meant the introduction of a long-range fighter escort was no longer a priority. Following the swift reduction of military forces post-war, the USAAF found itself with limited funds for new propeller-driven aircraft, particularly as jet fighters like the Messerschmitt Me 262 had proven superior in speed to P-51 Mustangs over Germany in late 1944. Therefore, the many P-82S that had not yet had their engines installed were placed in storage, facing an unclear destiny. However, the onset of the Cold War revived its prospects. As tensions escalated throughout 1946, the strategic importance of having a capable long-range escort fighter, particularly for bomber missions, became evident once more. This led the USAAF to revisit and complete the stored P-82S, in many cases transitioning them to use the Allison engines. The aircraft soon showed its excellent performance capabilities, highlighted in February 1947 when one P-82B named Betty Joe flew non-stop from Hawaii to New York without refueling. It covered 5,051 miles in 14 hours and 32 minutes, setting a record for the longest non-stop flight by a propeller-driven fighter and confirming its suitability for long-range escort fighter missions. 1 year later, in February 1948, the first operational P-82B units were delivered to the Air Defense Command, part of the newly formed United States Air Force. In April, the 325th Fighter Group at McCord Field, Washington, became the first operational unit to be equipped with the aircraft. The same year, a new P-82E variation was developed, but the designation would prove short-lived, as in June 1948, the USAF replaced the P for pursuit with F for fighter, so all P-82S became F-82S. Over the next 2 years, more and more F-82 squadrons were established. Finally, in June 1950, the fighter would have its first opportunity to prove itself on the battlefield with the outbreak of the Korean War. Twin Mustangs from the 68th Fighter Squadron stationed at Itazuki Air Base took part in the first U.S. air combat operation of the war on June 25th, after being alerted about North Korea's invasion of South Korea across the 38th parallel. They conducted a reconnaissance mission over key transportation routes, finding significant enemy movement, including 58 tanks. 2 days later, while providing air cover for an evacuation of civilians from Kimpo Airfield, F-82S from the 347th Provisional Fighter Group, F-82S engaged with North Korean fighters, resulting in the first U.S. aerial victory of the war by Lieutenant William G. Skeeter Hudson. Throughout the early part of the war, the F-82 would continue to play a major part in the United States aerial operations, proving its versatility by adapting to many new roles that went far beyond its creator's initial vision of a long-range escort fighter. The F-82G and H were outfitted for the role of night fighters, equipped with radar and an additional crew member to operate it in order to be able to engage enemy aircraft in darkness. Meanwhile, F-82Bs and Gs frequently took part in ground attack missions, supporting troops by attacking enemy positions and convoys. As the war progressed, F-82S would also be used for weather reconnaissance and maintaining airfield alerts during nighttime and adverse weather conditions, but their combat duties gradually decreased as it was replaced by newer fighters such as the jet-powered Lockheed F-94 Starfire. No longer needed in Korea, F-82 squadrons were redeployed to patrol the skies over Alaska, where it would take on yet another different role, that of an interceptor, ready to chase out any Soviet aircraft that might try to test the U.S. air defenses. The Twin Mustangs served further north than any other aircraft in the U.S. Air Force during that period, escorting missions for Strategic Air Command's B-36 Peacemaker bombers around Barter Island in the Beaufort Sea, located near Alaska's northernmost point. However, wear and tear, along with a shortage of spare parts, resulted in the F-82 being phased out from the United States Air Force inventory, with the last units officially retired by 1953. Though the North American F-82 Twin Mustang had a relatively short service career, it has left an indelible mark on aviation history. Its instantly recognizable twin fuselage design was no gimmick, as the F-82's impact and versatility proved to be profound and multifaceted, as the aircraft constantly adapted to the United States' evolving military needs. While its role in history may be less renowned than its single fuselage forebearer, the P-51 Mustang, It carved out a niche that demonstrated the adaptability and endurance of piston-engine fighters in an era increasingly dominated by jets. Its phased retirement in the early 1950s marked the end of an era, but it continues to stand as a symbol of the ingenuity and relentless spirit of innovation that drove mid-20th century military aviation. Today, 5 F-82s are known to survive, 3 on display in museums, including the record-breaking Betty Jo, 1 under restoration, and 1 that has been restored to flying status. In the heat of World War II, America's quest for aerial supremacy, engineering feats ever attempted. At the forefront was the XP55 Ascender, an aircraft so advanced it looked like something out of science fiction. With its 1,275 horsepower engine innovatively placed behind the cockpit, the XP55 was designed to maximize aerodynamic efficiency and maneuverability. Its canard wings provided additional lift and improved control at low speeds, while the twin tails enhanced stability and control, making these pioneering features that set it apart from anything seen before. One of the most remarkable aspects of the XP55 was one of its safety features for pilots. In the event of a bailout, pilots could jettison the pusher propeller, ensuring a clear and safe exit from the aircraft. With a design as audacious as its aspirations, the XP55 was intended to surpass contemporary American fighters like the P-38 Lightning, P-40 Warhawk, and P-51 Mustang, offering superior speed and agility. Could this daring experiment redefine aerial combat to achieve total dominance? In early 1939, as political and military tensions engulfed Europe and the Third German Reich became a threat to the French and British, the United States military prepared for a future conflict in the Old World and, more importantly, the Pacific against the Empire of Japan. The U.S. Army Air Corps found itself unprepared to face the new aircraft its future counterparts were deploying for a new era of air warfare. The stakes were high. On November 27, 1939, the Army issued Proposal R-40C, calling for a fighter aircraft that would surpass any existing fighter in the American arsenal in every aspect. Army Air Corps Major Edward M. Powers, the officer behind the request, desired an aircraft with a high top speed, top-notch maneuverability, superior armament that could tackle enemy fighters and bombers alike, and excellent visibility for the pilot so that he could be aware of any threats around him. In addition to these performance requirements, the proposal also emphasized a low initial cost and easy, inexpensive maintenance. As if that was not enough, the Army was open to considering unconventional aircraft configurations that defied the standard designs of the time. Over 50 responses were received, but less than a dozen made it. Eventually, the USAAC settled down to 4 designs submitted by Northrop, Curtiss, Bell, and Vultee. In a daring leap towards the future, Curtiss-Wright, under the innovative eye of designer Donovan Berlin, ventured into uncharted skies with the CW-24. This aircraft was unlike anything previously seen, featuring a revolutionary swept-wing pusher configuration with the elevator positioned boldly at the nose and twin fins and rudders gracing its wingtips. Pioneering for its time, the CW-24 also included tricycle landing gear, a stark departure from the conventional designs of the era. At the heart of this ambitious machine was the experimental Pratt & Whitney X1800 engine, an H-shaped behemoth with 28 cylinders spread across 4 rows, which promised a staggering 2,000 horsepower aimed at propelling the aircraft beyond the 500 miles per hour. Parallel to this, Northrop ventured into similarly unconventional territory with the XP56 Black Bullet, another contender in the quest for aerodynamic supremacy. The XP56 was an audacious design characterized by its unique flying wing configuration. It eliminated the need for a fuselage and tail assembly, pushing the boundaries of traditional aircraft design even further. This bold approach underlined an era where the limits of aviation technology were not just tested but expanded, setting the stage for the future of aerial combat and aircraft design. In June 1940, Curtiss-Wright was awarded an Army contract to develop a wind tunnel model designated P-55. The wind tunnel tests lasted from November 1940 to January 1941, leaving the Army dissatisfied with the results. Thus, Curtiss Wright decided to develop its full-scale mock-up for testing. This prototype, crafted from welded steel tubing with wooden wings and fabric covering, took to the skies powered by a modest 275-horsepower Monasco engine. Its trials at the Muroc bombing range in California showcased commendable performance, albeit with a top speed of 180 miles per hour due to the engine's limitations. However, the innovative spirit of the CW-24 shone through as adjustments were made to enhance its stability, including the enlargement and repositioning of its wingtip fins and adding dorsal and ventral fins to the fuselage. Over 169 flights were conducted between December 1941 and May 1942. Following these tests, the aircraft was transferred to Langley Field, Virginia, for additional testing under the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA. In July 1942, the Army Air Corps issued a contract to produce 3 prototypes equipped with Allison Vi 1710 engines providing over 1,275 horsepower, leading to the cancellation of the X-1800 engine. The design was dubbed XP55 Ascender, but pilots soon began referring to it as the Ascender due to its unusual pusher design. Unlike more conventional American aircraft, such as the P-38, P-40, and P-51, the XP-55 design mounted the engine behind the cockpit, with the pilot driving an aft-mounted pusher propeller, a feature that set it apart from its contemporaries. In contrast, the P-38 had a twin-engine configuration with the engines mounted on twin booms and the cockpit in a central nacelle. Likewise, the P-40 featured a tractor configuration with the engine and propeller at the front of the aircraft. Furthermore, the XP-55 Ascender featured a canard design with small forewings on the fuselage, a feature that added to its impressive design. Curtiss considered that the Ascender's innovative configuration provided more benefits than conventional airplane designs. First of all, the fighter would be more efficient due to the position of the propeller right behind the fuselage. This would increase the overall efficiency of the plane by reducing the profile drag and making it more maneuverable. The reason was simple. A pusher required less stabilizing of the vertical tail area, presenting less weathercock effect. The shorter fuselage would also result in a dramatic decrease in the fuselage wetted area and weight, turning the XP-55 into a more agile and stable platform. Another characteristic of the XP-55 was a jettison system for the propeller. If the pilot bailed out, he pulled a lever that completely detached the propeller from the aircraft, providing him a clear exit to jump out. Besides its canard design, the XP-55 Ascender also featured twin tails and swept wings, another innovation for its time. This type of wing was uncommon during the period, as there was not enough information available to corroborate that its employment significantly reduced drag caused by the formation of shockwaves. Although the Germans had already been conducting studies since the early 1930s, the theories were unknown to their American counterparts, adding more mystery to Curtiss's design. Lastly, the XP-55 pioneered tricycle landing gear in American aeronautics before it became the standard for all U.S. aircraft. Overall, the Ascender had a length of 29 feet, a wingspan of 40 feet, and a height of 10 feet. It had a gross weight of over 7,700 pounds. Initially, the prototypes were expected to be armed with 2 20mm Hispano autocannons and 2 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, but none was ever fitted with the desired armament due to testing problems. The first XP-55 prototype made its first flight on July 19, 1943, and met its tragic fate on November 15, 1943, when test pilot Harvey Gray experienced a severe pitch issue during a trial flight. The aircraft went into an uncontrollable descent from 16,000 feet, prompting Gray to bail out successfully. The prototype was lost entirely. Already under construction during the prototype's crash, the second XP-55 Ascender incorporated some quick modifications based on the initial findings. These included an enlarged elevator, a modified tab system, and changes from balance tabs to spring tabs on the ailerons. This prototype was subjected to restricted flight conditions to avoid the stall issues noted in its predecessor. Featuring more extensive modifications, the third Ascender was equipped with 4.50 caliber machine guns and had increased wing length and elevator travel limits to improve stall resistance. However, these adjustments initially allowed the pilot to stall the aircraft during takeoff, leading to further modifications and the addition of a mechanical stall warning device. As testing progressed, similar modifications were applied to the middle prototype. However, persistent stability issues and the non-availability of the planned X1800 engine hindered the XP55's performance. By 1944, with emerging jet technologies overshadowing propeller-driven designs, the XP55 project was ultimately abandoned. The third prototype bewildered the public during an air show at Wright Field, Ohio on May 27, 1945. The event gathered a crowd exceeding 100,000 spectators. The skies were filled with unique American aircraft, including the Douglas XB-19 and the advanced P-59 Era Comet, one of the Army's first jet-powered fighters. At around 4 p.m., an aerial display traversed the field. Captain William C. Glasgow, a 28-year-old from Niagara Falls, spearheaded the formation. The veteran pilot, who had seen plenty of combat and had been decorated with the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, and other decorations, piloted the experimental XP55 Ascender. He performed a slow roll post-field pass, followed by a continued flight path. However, Glasgow's execution appeared unstable, wobbling left and right. Tragedy struck seconds later when the aircraft swooped close to the ground and tore off 150 feet of fence. What followed was a fiery eruption, quickly shrouded in dark smoke. The seasoned pilot and 4 civilians lost their lives instantly. The third XP55 prototype turned into rubble. But it was not all lost for the Ascender. The second prototype was in perfect condition and was transferred from Freeman Field to Park Ridge, where it remained dormant for half a century. It was not until 2001 that it was trucked to the Kalamazoo Aviation History Museum in southwest Michigan for restoration, where it remains today. According to the National Air and Space Museum, quote, pilots feared the Ascender's vicious stall characteristics, and it was just plain slow compared to most fighters already in production. Although an innovative design, the XP55 Ascender's overall performance was not as impressive as that of its contemporaries. During test flights, the XP55 achieved a top speed of around 390 miles per hour at 19,300 feet. This pushed the fighter to the limit, leading to engine cooling problems. Another problem that test pilots reported during the routine test flights was handling. While the XP55 excelled during routine flight at cruising speeds, it became overly sensitive at slow speeds, exacerbated by its primitive canard design. Although it could reach speeds of approximately 390 miles per hour, the XP55's overall performance frequently fell short compared to the more traditional fighter aircraft already in service. For instance, the P-51 Mustang could fly 400 miles per hour without issues plaguing the Ascender. It could also carry bombs, a feature the XP55 lacked. The P-40 Warhawk was slower than the Ascender, reaching a top speed of around 340 miles per hour. Nonetheless, it had a short takeoff distance and had excellent handling characteristics. With the advent of jet fighter technology, the XP55 Ascender was quickly phased out in favor of more conventional airframe designs powered by jet technology. Germany's introduction of the Me-262 Swallow in 1944, the world's first powered fighter, proved the future of air combat belonged to jet aircraft. Britain and the US closely followed this trend. Curtiss saw the writing on the wall and phased out the Ascender abruptly. Nonetheless, the XP55 contributed valuable data on the canard configuration, allowing aircraft engineers to study how aircraft stability could be managed with non-traditional configurations. The pusher configuration was another area where the XP55 provided essential insights. Although this configuration did not become standard in later fighter designs, understanding its implications for aircraft handling and maintenance helped refine future experimental designs. All in all, the XP55 Ascender, just like the Vultee XP54 and the Northrop XP56, collectively expanded the boundaries of what was considered technically feasible at the time and paved the way for more radical innovations in aircraft design that would appear in subsequent decades.